Welcome in, everybody, to the Authority Podcast here on the V Podcast Network. Thanks, as always, for being with us. And it's a pleasure to bring you a conversation here around some critical topics, some things that we've talked about before around teacher wellness, mental health, overall well-being, and addressing the burnout and stress crisis. But it's something we can't really address enough because it is critically important. My guest is Danna Thomas. Danna is a former Baltimore City Public School teacher. She's the founder of the Happy Teacher Revolution, which is a global initiative to support the mental health and wellness of educators. The organization has already supported thousands of teachers across the United States, Canada, Nigeria, Brazil, and Senegal by providing educators with the time and space to feel, deal, and be real about the social emotional demands of the job. She is the author of a new book called Happy Teacher Revolution: The Educator's Roadmap to Claiming and Sustaining Joy. Danna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ross. I'm so happy to be here. And thank you to everybody who's listening in. I'm really excited to talk about teacher well-being and mental health with you today.
Excellent. So I wanted to start out with a little bit of, there's a lot of research included in the book and in the background here to really understanding the extent and enormity of the stress levels and wellness concerns in the profession. And I think that's a good place to contextualize a lot of what we talk about. So in your findings, how many teachers are facing high levels of stress, higher than they should be?
To answer your question, I'm going to spit a lot of numbers out. So if anybody who wants to learn more or specifically about the citations and sources that I'll be mentioning, they can check out our website, happyteacherrevolution.com, and how to get more information there. But there are studies that before the pandemic, coming out of the University of Missouri, has shown that 93% of teachers experience overwhelming levels of stress. So if we apply that number to the United States alone, of the 3.6 million teachers in the US, that means that there's an estimated 3.3 million teachers who are stressed out, which means that there's an estimated 80 million children sitting in the classroom of a stressed out teacher. What was really interesting with Happy Teacher Revolution, now we are a professional development organization. We are MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support for adult social emotional learning and well-being. So we teach teachers how to facilitate and hold community space for one another to really focus on that adult SEL. And to be honest with you, Ross, I was so focused on teacher burnout and teacher overwhelm, just like that study I just mentioned, especially leading up to the pandemic. And then suddenly it's like a light switch flipped. And instead of focusing on the 93% of teachers that are burnt out, I thought, what about the 7% that aren't? What are they doing? Can we measure it? Can we replicate it? Can it be a little less shrouded in mystery? And so that's when we really leaned into evaluating the program and program evaluation through the lens of external researchers who are experts in the field of positive psychology. And that's where we learn there's two big issues in the field today. So first and foremost, this is a new frontier when it comes to teacher mental health and well-being. This is something that hasn't necessarily been studied before or evaluated. When I first started Happy Teacher Revolution and Googled teacher mental health, nothing came up. Everything was very student focused, which I'm grateful for, that we have a lens of awareness around the need of supporting our students as mental health and well-being. I was a student who struggled with my mental health and well-being. My teacher saved my life. That's the reason I became a teacher myself. So of course that is so important. But the two big issues in the field today is, number one, people are doing research. People are doing research on burnout. Thankfully, that's something that's happening more, but they're looking at all the barriers, they're looking at all the problems, and they're not looking at the protective factors and things that lead to success. And big problem number two is that people are conflating lack of burnout with well-being. Just because we might be able to say that, oh, teachers are less burnt out, it doesn't necessarily mean that teachers are well or that teachers are happy. And so that's where Happy Teacher Revolution comes in. It's not just in terms of being a solution or being an opportunity to develop these protective factors and develop an opportunity that can lead to success, but we're also measuring pre and post data of getting a snapshot of that well-being of teachers and folks who participate in the program before implementation and after.
What's unique about teacher stress, teacher burnout? Is it the causes? Is there something else that is unique compared to,
Yeah.
the stress and burnout in other professions.
I think what I hear from teachers the most is that veteran teachers are saying to me, in years 10, 20, 30 plus years in doing this work, why does it keep getting harder?
Hmm.
When you think about an attorney or maybe a medical professional or doctor, a physician, in years 10, 20, 30, it's not necessarily getting more and more and more challenging. And yet for our educators, it's as if more is getting piled onto their plates, more is expected of them. And not only that, but the constant revolving door of teachers and teacher turnover puts an invisible weight on our veteran teachers
Hmm.
to kind of pick up the slack. There's an emotional labor that happens every time a great teacher leaves the classroom in terms of a new person coming in and teaching them the ropes. And this is how the copy machine works. And you got to do this, that, and the other. So I think that that's been a huge issue, is that our veteran teachers, our experts in the field, are underutilized and not valued at the level that they
Hmm.
should be. And that our teachers are leaving in droves. I mean, if we had that same number of people quitting in law enforcement, or that same number of people quitting as attorneys or as physicians, the world would be up in arms. And yet we're looking at teacher as if they're renewable resources, and they're just aren't.
Yeah, I mean, it's the shortage and the lack of new teachers that are entering the profession, wanting to enter, and the large numbers that have left is right now a significant challenge to solve. And it's not going to be solved without starting with retention, better wellness, better, treatment opportunities, all the things that the current educators want, which in turn will make it more appealing. Outside of that, are there certain things that teachers are expressing that they want, that they feel like would solve some of the areas, where they're having stress that's unaddressed?
Yeah. Well, of course, first and foremost, we need to pay teachers more. I mean, that's something that just is universal, that our teachers should not be on the cover of Time magazine for selling their blood plasma to earn a living wage, which was the 2018 cover of Time magazine. But it's that, and valuing teachers as human beings, not human doing. So the data-driven culture has been incredibly dehumanizing, not only for teachers, but for our students. I think the biggest issue is teachers' lack of autonomy, of being seen as experts, that they did in fact earn the credentials and attend the courses and take the praxis tests and so on and so forth. So they should be trusted and treated as professionals. And honestly, the biggest thing for me is the adult social emotional support for the job. So we hear a lot about social emotional learning and encouraging things like self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, getting along together with our students, for our students. And yet, where are the spaces for us to engage in those same competencies as adults? There might be the one-off, back to school get together that happens once the beginning of the school year, maybe at the end of the school year. But what about all of that time in between? And how can we foster our teachers, not just in terms of self-care and individual well-being, but collective care and collective well-being?
Yeah. What does contagion look like from the teachers you've talked to, or from your own personal experience? I guess, when it is kind of going around, particularly maybe you have newer teachers who are coming in optimistic about what the job's going to be, or, but then they're in a building where it's clear that this one and that one are overwhelmed by the stress. But how does that kind of find its way around a building?
Yeah. So the good news is joy is a contagion too.
Mhm.
It's like there can be positive contagions. That's interesting. One of the slogans that some teachers have shared with me, especially our new teachers, have shared that when they first started teaching, they were encouraged to avoid the teacher's lounge at all costs. Do not go into the teacher's lounge. That's where everybody goes to vent. It's the negativity death spiral. Stay out of there. And it's really fascinating to consider, where is a space for teachers to be authentic and to be
Mhm.
uncensored, and not to have the mask on or to have that performative nature and rather be their authentic selves and be witnessed in that authenticity amongst their colleagues. And so, what has been really interesting is the Happy Teacher Revolution meeting space. When it's valued and supported by leadership and in school and district communities and seen as such, that's the same importance as professional development for literacy, professional development for math, but this as a professional development space for teachers to prioritize and arrive at their own solutions around their own well-being and witness others in doing the same, that it gets compartmentalized. That when teachers can be in a safe space, a brave space to be authentic and not necessarily totally positive, where we can name toxic positivity and say, look, this is really challenging, or here's something that I'm grappling with, and not necessarily have people come in and fix and solve everything right away, but to, again, just be witnessed in it. I think what is incredibly powerful is that it builds a camaraderie with the staff and it builds a camaraderie with that particular community. So that way, when we show up Monday morning, we have this level of resilience that might not have been as developed otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering and leading toward with that is what's the tipping point, right? Where the contagiousness of joy outweighs the contagiousness of stress and burnout. And if it's a 93-7 ratio, right, that's tough, but how can we chip away at that a bit at a time to the point where it's 20, 30, 35, 40% are not just content, not just not burned out, but really feeling joyful, enthusiastic, so that can, really begin to rub off on those who are feeling, they're leaning in the direction of burnout, or they're not seeing a lot of answers, right? I mean, because ultimately, yes, it is there's a systemic problem, there's a district and a building issue, and those are things that need to be worked on and resolved. Ultimately, those things are going to happen on whatever timeline they happen or don't. Every individual teacher can't. It's out of their control. But what's in their control is their own view, their own attitude, their own way of, you say, claiming joy, right? Claiming the opportunities to have the impact they want to have, and to say, if this is my calling and this is my purpose and this is the work I want to do, I am going to be responsible for making that happen. I'm not going to feel like I'm being forced out of it by somebody else. And so that's not to say that if somebody has reached the point where they're burned out and they need to make a decision they need to make, that's a bad thing for them to do. But it is a bad thing if it's happening in the numbers it's happening now, like for the system, right, for the future. But it's also a case of everybody should make their own decisions about what they want their career to be. That goes both ways, right? That also goes to not saying, well, there's all these systemic issues and I can't change them, and even though this is what I really want to do, I have no choice but to leave. I mean, we all have options and decisions and choices we can make inside of ourselves. But I would think an environment where I'm seeing examples of that, where I'm seeing, okay, well, what are these people doing? Because they seem to be, this teacher's been here as long as I have, and he or she seems to be doing okay. Like, I guess, how do we get that, that contagiousness working in the right direction to the point where it really starts to, it's not just, okay, those naive or two over there, but there's more, I guess, social pressure, in a sense, positive social pressure, to see what it means to claim my own joy, my own happiness, my own positive outlook.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of a part of the book in the beginning. There's actually a permission slip I made that I want folks to tear out and put up, just like a permission slip for any field trip or anything like that, for folks to consent to and actually actively sign up for, give themselves permission to claim their own well-being, that they're not
Mhm.
voluntold to do this. I like to say that word voluntold, where it's like, you have to take care of yourself. This has to be something that folks arrive at with their own agency, with their own sovereignty, with their own autonomy. And the autonomy piece really speaks to something that we utilize in our meetings called the 12 choices. And they're also in the book. These affirmations are actually custom coloring pages. So to keep the book more affordable, there's no coloring, but I thought, people can color this in during PD. And the 12 choices are adapted from Vicki Davis's 12 choices to step back from burnout. But they're things like, I choose the battles worth fighting. I choose to disconnect and detach with love. I choose to make time for sleep. I choose to schedule and prioritize what really matters. And no matter how the school year started, I choose to finish well. Because I think that autonomy piece, or folks really actively having those sentence starters of I choose to let go or I choose to be grateful, is really empowering for folks. And then finally, the book itself is actually divided into 3 separate parts. So well-being through the lens of the individual, well-being through the lens of cultivating relationships, and well-being through the lens of systemic change. Because it's all the above. And it's just, everything ends and begins with the next, that we can't cultivate those relationships that are well if we're not coming from a place of wellness, and we can't possibly enact systemic change if we aren't cultivating that individual wellness, because then we'll burn out. There's a lot of change advocates and activists who are burning out, and there's a lot of social innovators who are burning out, because it's a lot. It's a lot to be working within a system that isn't designed with the well-being and mental health of the adults in mind. This is something that we're operating within and learning about and collecting data all along the way. And I'm just so
Mhm.
proud of Happy Teacher Revolution and our research team specifically, because we have now found through preliminary findings that our participants with higher self-perception of that psychological well-being were over 4 times more likely to stay in the field for 3 or more years, which is huge, because
Yeah.
that's the end game. Is I want to be obsolete. Happy Teacher Revolution doesn't exist anymore because everyone's happy.
Mhm.
And it doesn't need to exist, because really, yeah, when folks are well, they're going to stick around. They're
Right.
going to stay in the work. And it's not just in teaching, it's any job. I think it makes a difference when employees are well and committed to what they're doing, whether it's a barista or, whether it's somebody who's a physician or in any other capacity. But when we're in the work of supporting and serving children, I think it's especially important that those adults are well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that seems like a really critical threshold, that number, right? Because it's going to take until that 3rd year, 4th year, when you feel like you know what you're doing and you have efficacy, and have, so now I have a more optimistic outlook for the job, because now I feel like I know what I'm doing. It's going to be a lot easier to leave a profession at the point when you're still feeling like I'm overwhelmed and I really don't even know what I'm doing, and and so maybe I should just kind of go do something else. But once you get to the point where, okay, now I know how to do this job, I know how to teach, I know my students are learning, I no longer have to, I'm not overwhelmed by that part anymore.
Yeah.
Now I have these other things that I still have to continue to work on, but it's less daunting, because at least I have some confidence in myself as a professional. It kind of is making me think there's another thing, and you may have more specific ideas than this. I don't have the answers, but it might be worth teachers at least reflecting on, is how to use of the apparently negative realities of the state of the profession and the state of schools to your advantage, and to look at it a different way. So,
Mm.
there's not enough teachers, we're overworked, etc. One, the reason I think why the stress is so pervasive and why it's felt so acutely is because teachers are there because they want students to succeed. And when they feel like they're not having the resources, the support, the energy, the ability to help students as much as they want to, or they feel like the school isn't doing so, right, that feels very stressful and challenging, and it can lead to a loss of hope. Um, But one thing is, okay, identify like what are the things that are making an impact on student success and what aren't those, what are what am I spending time on just because I'm spending time, or what am I even being asked to spend time on that I know has nothing to do with student success? Like, what are some opportunities I have to make some choices that may improve my wellness, are not going to harm students, and eventually will help them because and all in another way of saying it, like everybody's in a different situation, but if you're in a school that is struggling to find enough teachers, that's, I mean, and you're there and you're doing the job, what you have to think about, you might have some leverage right now. Again, like that's not to give anybody what the answer is for them, but it's something to reflect on and think about. Okay, like, is part of my overwhelm because I'm working all these long hours, and am I spending a lot of those hours on things that I know don't actually make a difference? And how might I choose wellness over that? How might I, at the very least, have a conversation and be proactive and advocate, right, with things that, because it's been the status quo, or because somebody may not realize the negative effect it's having, and rather than being silent and suffering and just continuing to do it, again, another opportunity to make a choice, to have ownership over that, and to say, you know what, I can see very clearly here at this point, like, I have experience, I understand what teaching is, and what's helping students and what's not, and it's not helping them if I am getting totally overworked here by spending a bunch of time on the things that I know are not the most important. But I don't know, what does that sound like anything to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing that came up was the term moral distress, which I go into in the book, which is when what you believe should happen does not happen, which results in a carrying of dissonance in the body. So not only does that cause stress, but your body actually takes on that stress. And so I think it's important for teachers to name that and validate that, to let themselves feel like, yeah, acknowledge and affirm how valid their stress is, especially in this day and age, and what teachers are grappling with and facing the repercussions and ripple effects of the pandemic on our students' social emotional learning, as well as teachers who started teaching in 2020. Our teachers in years 3, 4 don't know what it's like to not be a pandemic teacher.
Right.
And so I think it's important to name those things like moral distress, and to give our educators permission to trust their gut, trust their instinct. If there's something that isn't sitting right and it's like, I don't think this is really in service of all students here in my community, or I don't think this is in service of, there can be a lot of fear that teachers experience when it comes to that speaking up and that self-advocating. Like, it can be really tough and really scary. And so I talk about it in my book, in the systemic change piece, that, if it feels tough and scary, form allyships. Maybe there's a teacher down the hall who feels the same way. Strengthen numbers, find someone else who might be able to articulate it and back them up if you feel like you're kind of the lone wolf or the only one who's feeling this way. I think it's also important to be data driven with these things. Make sure you're referencing the school climate and culture surveys and data, or whatever is might align or boost kind of what your instincts or intuition is nudging you. And it's important that we sunset policies and protocols that aren't in best service of students. I mean, I think the education system is slow to change, but we're learning more and more about being trauma informed. We're learning more and more about the importance of social emotional competencies and things like that. So I think it's important that we have a growth mindset, and that we stay open-minded in terms of evolving and improving what it looks like to support pedagogy, what it looks like to support our teachers, that hopefully when folks are student teaching and taking the praxis test, maybe there will be a praxis question about vicarious trauma, moral distress, and caregiver burnout someday. Like, I'm hoping this is something that gets talked about more, and that we prepare teachers for as they embark on their journey in education. But yeah, I think you named a lot of important things that is visceral and resonates with a lot of folks.
Yeah. Oh, that, I mean, again, they go back to that word claiming, right, in the subtitle here of the book, that there's at least again, like there's opportunities to reflect and say, what can I do here? There's, as it pertains to compensation, as it pertains to other aspects of the way the teaching profession is kind of handled and treated. One of the teachers aren't treated like professionals, right? Okay, I feel like I'm not being treated like a professional. Am I acting like a professional? Like, what do professionals do? They take accountability for themselves and their work. They know how to have a conversation and advocate and do these things, right? Okay, well, let me show. I want to have. Teachers should have a voice in shaping what education is. Am I claiming my voice? Am I finding opportunities to make that happen, or am I just going home and venting about it? But when I'm in the workplace, am I doing what I can do? And look, if I try to do these things and nobody listens, it doesn't make a difference, etc., then that's another issue. But have I tried that? Form a coalition, like you said. Have I spoken to my peers as professionals and said, okay, as professionals, what do we want to see here, and what do we want to do, and how are we going to try to make that happen, and having an action plan versus just kind of saying that it's hopeless, and like there's a time and place to let off steam, and there's a time and place to say, well, if I want this to be better, like, how can I try to make it better? And there's certainly no guarantees that every school, every school leadership, staff, every district is going to have the insight, the empathy to actually listen and make these things happen. But sometimes we don't know until we try. We don't know. I mean, there's overwhelm for a lot of those folks too, right? There's a lot of things that are challenging, and once we get into the middle of cycle, it's hard to stop it and say, okay, can we just pause everything and look at whatever's happening here and change things? So they're opportunities. But I think one of the important things that I wanted to ask is, and this would speak directly to how important it is, what are the effects on students? What are the consequences for students when we have this 93% of teachers feeling highly stressed?
So the consequence for students, it's threefold. So first, when we talk about academic achievement, there's a study from the University of Arizona that linked teacher depression to low student math scores. There was another study out of Canada at the University of British Columbia that had measured, they took biometric data samples. So they had teachers and students of those teachers, they happen to be middle school students who loved this part of the experiment, give saliva samples. So they had to spit into these containers, and the middle schoolers loved this part. But what they did when they measured the saliva samples, they were measuring the stress hormone that we call cortisol. And they found that teachers with higher levels of cortisol or higher levels of stress correspondingly had students with higher levels of stress, which means to say that stress is contagious both ways. The last impact on students is through the lens of early childhood education. The Yale Child Study Center held a study where they measured teachers' job satisfaction and found that teachers who were stressed out, burnt out, low job satisfaction in early childhood classrooms were more likely to suspend and refer students of color more than white students, and boys more than girls at a rate of 4 times as much. And so when there are that disproportionate amount of suspensions and referrals for students of color and boys more than girls, that can lead a ripple effect and impact in later years on their reading scores by the age of 3rd grade. And so in places where I used to teach in Baltimore, they actually use those 3rd grade reading level scores to determine how many prison cells to build 20 plus years later. And so if we're not adequately supporting our teachers' mental health and well-being, the impact on students is that we're not impacting student academic achievement positively. We're having a negative impact on student social emotional learning, and we're perpetuating the school to prison pipeline. So it's become an equity issue.
Yeah. So what does it look like when we turn it around?
Yeah.
So what do teachers do to claim and sustain their joy? How are classrooms looking different? What is it all? How does it all come together?
Yeah. So the first way it comes together is considering work-life integration. That when it comes to your well-being, it's not something that bookends your workday, like before you get to school and then after you leave or on the weekends. It's how can you integrate well-being into the day, even
Mhm.
alongside your students, even alongside your colleagues. For me, that looked like having a rest and digest. So after incredibly high stimulus times of the schedule for my students, that was cafeteria, transitioning to lunch and coming back, we had a moment of decompression. I needed it too, that we did together. And in that case, my students had developed such awareness that when they would see me start escalating, they would look at me at 5 years old and say, Miss Thomas, it's time to take a take five breath. I mean, they could recognize the changes,
Mhm.
and they were my little well-being accountability partners, to be honest. Another strategy is a win journal. Having a journal of wins at the end of each day, whether it's a teeny tiny little win, write it down, jot it down, write down that win, so that by the end, your journal's filled up of all of these micro moments of glimmers rather than triggers. This is a term coined by Deb Dana, and we go into this in the book too. But glimmers are the micro moments of joy. They actually help rewire and recircuit our brain to notice these bright spots or notice these gratitude moments. And it's a beautiful practice to do alongside your students. Another thing I would suggest is joining Happy Teacher Revolution. This is something that I'm really passionate about, the network of folks who've launched and led these support group meetings within their own communities. It's been really beautiful to witness folks who've gone through our training and held these spaces in their classes, in their communities, in their neighborhoods, and hearing feedback, not just from the teachers themselves, but their spouses saying, my wife is a different person walking through the door at the end of the day, or my mom has time on the weekends to do X, Y, and Z, where before she was driving to school, even on a Saturday to get stuff done. So it's just been really inspiring to even hear from colleagues about other teachers saying like, wait a second, you're smiling in the hallway, transitioning to the cafeteria. What's going on here? Like, what's in your drink? What do you say? What's the secret? And yeah, the secret is claiming joy. And the thing about it is, I wish it was a quick fix and
Mhm.
a one size fits all solution, but it's not. Everyone has their own unique journey and roadmap to claiming joy. And it's been fascinating to hear folks' evolutions of that and what brings them joy. So some people, there was a teacher I met who absolutely loves watching reruns of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, specifically from the 90s. That's her joy. That's her bright spot. So she'll put on a clip on YouTube of the Macy's parade, and like that orients her in a positive space. For me, I love playing my saxophone. I love creative outlets, gardening, things like that. And that's unique to me. I have a friend who loves to run. I really don't. I can't stand
Yeah.
running. But that's something, that's her journey to joy. And so I hope that for folks who engage with Happy Teacher Revolution, whatever capacity, whatever spectrum it is, whether it's just following us on Instagram or reading the book or even getting trained, if that's something someone's interested in doing, I think it's important that folks realize it's a unique journey and it's not going to be a prescribed formula for everybody.
Do you have a certain way you speak with a teacher who is skeptical of joining the revolution, or is feeling like it's outside their comfort zone, right? Maybe they're feeling like, well, I'm just not that joyful of a person in general. It's not just about teaching, or anything like that, or it feels maybe it feels, I don't know how they inauthentic to them in some way, or just they're worried, well, if I go into my school and I'm trying this, and I'm one against many, I don't know if people are going to listen to me, or whatever their misgivings are. How do you talk them through that and get them to see the benefits of giving it a shot?
Yeah, I've definitely come across those teachers for sure, who are sitting there with their arms crossed and the bag of grading next to their chair that they're going to do instead of this whole happy revolution thing. What's this all about? And to be honest with you, I could see how the name is really incredibly misleading because it's not necessarily about happiness. It's about the full spectrum of human emotions and experiencing all of it and sitting with all of it. Sometimes it can be really uncomfortable to sit with joy for folks. That can feel
Mhm.
really familiar because chaos and cortisol is the norm, is the baseline. Happy Teacher Revolution, to be totally honest with you, started from a place of deep unhappiness and deep overwhelm. I started this grassroots support group movement when I was teaching 39 kindergartners in Southeast Baltimore in a classroom without heating or air conditioning, with asbestos in the tiles and lead in the water, and administration that was harassing young female teachers on the staff who weren't tenured. Like, to say I was in a toxic work environment is a gross understatement. And so I created this honestly for myself. I needed a bright
Mhm.
spot
Yeah.
to sit alongside my comrades, the folks to my left and to my right, who I thought, wow, y'all are the ones who really do have my back. And then I realized, wow, we're all operating within this system. There's happy principal revolution, happy superintendent revolution, happy administrative secretary revolution, lunch lady bus driver revolution. Like, anybody in the capacity of serving and supporting students, we've got to claim our joy and well-being. And what's interesting is that in the realm of positive psychology, we're actually not measuring happiness in our research scale. We're measuring well-being and resilience, especially in the face of deep adversity, is what we're in fact measuring. I want to develop our own scale someday, the Happy Teacher Revolution Wellbeing Scale, that
Mhm.
incorporates some of the things from the RIF scale of well-being, from Maslow's burnout inventory, from the Professional Quality of Life Index, but also, yeah, in some capacity, measuring happiness and measuring joy, because I think that that's really what this is all about, is sitting with the full spectrum of human emotions and not just censoring out the sparkly, blissful rainbow parts.
Yeah. Now, how does it change the way you see students once you start to see yourself and your reality differently?
I think you start to see students as the brilliant, wise, incredible humans that they are. It's like it opens up this pathway of exchange of teaching and learning to go both ways. And I think it really opens up an opportunity to be authentic and vulnerable in the think aloud of navigating the human experience. So when I taught kindergarten, I was reading a story, I would stop, have my little post-it notes, and think aloud my thought process to demonstrate the concepts that I was teaching. Oh, I wonder if this is an inference of this one. I wonder if, and why don't we do that think aloud when we're faced with real conflict in real life when it comes to those social emotional skills? So with my students, they've taught me everything I needed to know. They taught me the importance of laughter, of play, of getting outside and getting moving, of having a snack when I'm hungry so I don't get hangry, of going to the bathroom when I need to go to the bathroom instead of holding it and numbing out my body so I don't have an accident. Like, my
Mhm.
kindergartners taught me everything. And it totally changed my view of them when I started taking care of myself, because I'll be honest, before I was pouring into my well-being, I started to develop resentment towards them. I would think to myself, I spent all weekend on this unit plan, this lesson plan, this bulletin board, these emails to your fan, this, that, and the other, and you showed up and you disrespected me by doing X, Y, and Z, not thinking to myself, wait a second, that behavior might be an indicator of trauma. Oh,
Mhm.
that might be an indicator that this child is actually seeking social emotional support in this type of way. And I took it personally, like, oh, how dare, like, thinking they woke up that day just to really grind my gears. And it
Yeah.
just wasn't that wasn't the case at all. And so I think I had so much more patience, not only with them, but with myself in some of these more dialed up moments. One of our principals who piloted Happy Teacher Revolution, one of my favorite quotes that he ever said was, "A dysregulated adult cannot regulate a dysregulated child."
Uh-huh.
So if my lid is flit, my frontal cortex is going off, there's no way that I can dysregulate a child who also is popping off in their frontal cortex. And it's twice as many dysregulated people in the space. So that's really the biggest takeaway for me, is that when I can be grounded in myself and rooted in my practices of well-being and take a deep breath and take a moment to respond, then I'm doing so from a much more grounded place rather than potentially developing resentment.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just recording earlier today for my other podcast sideline sessions. And one of the things that came up around the mental game of sports is like looking at it as what if I win versus what if I lose, and putting too much pressure and perseverating on, oh, if I fail in this, then, and it just starts to spiral and we can't perform, versus saying, what if this goes well? Then what?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how important is that for more of an asset-based understanding of our students, and saying, okay, what if this kid does really great on this assignment? Then we can take that and go here, and then that leads to this. And once you start to look at it that way, do you start believing that's going to happen? Do you, take some slightly different actions, or even does the student get a different impression from you and feel like, okay, my teacher seems to believe I'm going to do well on this? Does that change their confidence level, right, and their engagement and their joy and all those things? But it starts with that. You really have to be thinking that way, and you can't, it's not false, but you have to feel like, oh, I switched it. Well, like, what's the upside of preparing for failure or expecting failure? Well, not much, right? We do everything we can to make sure that we hold on to that C, versus saying, well, okay, the kid can probably get a C without doing anything special, but what if it's a B? What if it's an A? But it all comes from that overall feeling, those positive feelings toward the work that you do and who you are, and your wellness and well-being and your ability to affect that kind of outcome, and then seeing others around you as capable of the same. So it's great stuff. Before we finish, I did want to ask you, who is Begonia?
Begonia is my 25-foot peach school bus that I will be living on in a week. So by the time folks listen to this, I will be full time on Begonia, my bus, in my Miss Frizzle era. She is an Austin School District bus that's been converted. So there's a bed and a shower and an oven and a sink and a bathroom and all of it. And I will be heading across the country holding Happy Teacher Revolution pop-up support group meetings, as well as book events and book signings across the US. So I am really thrilled to be embarking on this next adventure and sharing the work of Happy Teacher Revolution with folks who've already launched Happy Teacher and brand new folks to the movement too.
Excellent. Well, where can listeners learn more about that tour, about your work in general?
Yeah, check out our website, happyteacherrevolution.com. We have a free platform, Resources the Revolution, with a bunch of freebies and info and references and articles that I had mentioned some of the data from today. Also follow us on social media on Instagram at Happy Teacher Revolution. And if you want to follow along the school bus adventures, that's Revolution Tour Bus on Instagram.
Excellent. Well, listeners, we will put all these links below. You can find the book, Happy Teacher Revolution, on Wiley.com, Amazon, wherever you get your books. You can also go to happyteacherrevolution.com to learn about the book and tour and everything else as well. Put the social media links there so you can follow along. If it's coming to a city near you, you can participate, or you can even just read the book and learn what you can do in your school as a teacher, as an administrator, to help to bring more well-being to the profession. We know how important it is, and each of you really has an opportunity to make a difference there. So please do check all of that out at the links below. Please also subscribe to The Authority if you haven't already. We'll have more author interviews coming your way every week on all kinds of topics that help you every day. So please subscribe, please check out the links. And Danna, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a blast.